beginning, I'd like to thank my colleagues, Mariana and Ida, for inviting me to attend this workshop, and I hope to respect the time. The large votive deposits of Sicily and Magna Graecia are real research laboratories for the study of figurative terracottas in terms of quantity and typological variety, as well as diachronic extension, and provide remarkable contributions for their interpretation in context. This presentation brings together several remarks that have been developed in the course of the study of the figurative terracottas from the large votive deposit of Piazza San Francesco in Catania, and concerning a specific iconographic group, that of the archaic figurines and statuettes of maidens standing with or without attribute. I want to address the events concerning the discovery of the Piazza San Francesco context, which are well known and already widely published, but we'll focus mainly on the above-mentioned iconographic group of figurative terracottas of the archaic period. However, it's worth reminding briefly that the Catania votive deposit is one of the most extensive in the Western Mediterranean. It consists of several tens of thousands of fragments and wool pieces divided between pottery and coroplastic finds. The material is dated between the beginning of the 6th century and most of the 4th century BC. One aspect that characterizes the archaic phase of the deposit is the impressive quantity of statuettes and figurines, and I use the two terms in reference to the size of the coroplastic material. Statuettes are bigger than figurines. Statuettes and figurines representing standing maidens with or without attributes, an aspect that has not comparison in other large votive deposits of the same period, such as Bitaleni, for example. A number of them are imports from the East Greece, but the most consistent and typological varied nucleus consists of locally produced statuettes and figurines. These are often of considerable height, between 30 and 50 centimeters, and in few cases even more, which makes it possible to appreciate certain details that are lost in the current production of smaller figurines. They are generally images of young women in their prime or maidens. In such images, physical appearance is fundamental, and the various features such as body, posture, dress, emphasize the femininity of the figure. They have been found in many votive deposits in Sicily and Magna Graecia, although not always in such a large numbers, and have often been considered, both in the past and again in recent studies, as indeterminate or generic female iconographies, because they are often considered to be devoid of specific indicators useful in characterizing the figure. If there are any attributes, these are generally considered to be offerings to the titular deity of the sanctuary, or markers useful in identifying the deity itself. As a matter of fact, as will be seen in more detail, both the figure and the attribute, if any, are fundamental elements of figurative codes that express the identity of the dedicator or the identity of the person for which the item is dedicated. Over the past decades, particular attention has been paid to the study of the images, that is, to the interpretation of the iconography of figurative terracottas, often through the relationship between the images expressed in clay and the representation in other media, in particular in coeval ceramics and sculpture. This approach has been and continues to be considered, for example, the fundamental contribution of Stefanius and Comaxi, continues to be relevant to the embedding of different iconographic types of figurative terracottas into a network of images that are often helpful to understand their meaning. However, being the figurative terracottas a byproduct of the social and cultural milieu in which they were commissioned, made, used, and viewed, to fully grasp the symbolic value of these images, one must turn to the intangible, non-material sources, that is, the archaic lyrics. This literary genre, indeed, uses a visual language that finds material correspondence in the representation of several iconographic types of terracotta figurines. This approach, which interviews text and images in order to shed light on certain aspects of the Greek mentality, was adopted by Sieber in the book on the marble Attic korai, the poetic of appearance in the Attic korai, although the author often refers to some later sources, mainly of classical period, rather than to the archaic lyrics. The discussion can be further extended through the insights provided by important philological anthropological works, most of all the Callum's seminal works, and some important recent contributions on the visual imagery in archaic lyric poetry, such as the volume The Look of Lyric Greek Songs and the Visual. A few years ago, in an article entitled Il corpo, l'abito, l'attributo, religione e società nella coroplastica della Sicilia greca, I had stressed the need to read these images in their semantic unity, considering the body, the dress, and the attribute. In this contribution, I intend to develop a different approach to the same issue, in an attempt to acquire new insights useful for a better reading of the votive system of Catane deposit. In particular, I propose a parallel reading of the terracotta images of young maiden and the Parthenoi descriptions in archaic Greek lyric poetry, in the attempt to contextualize the reasons of some iconographic choices within a broader visual culture or a broader visual mentality. Since the topic is broad and full of insights, in this presentation, I will limit myself to a few examples and refer mainly to the works of two poets, Alkman and Sappho, with a few references to other poets. As previously stated, the figurative terracottas that are the subject of this contribution represent young maidens in their prime. In them, physical appearance is fundamental, and the various elements, body, posture, clothing, emphasize the femininity of the figure. Generally referred to as korai, they represent a specific age category, that of the unmarried young women on the threshold of marriage. The transition between childhood and adulthood is, as we know, a crucial moment of great physical and psychological transformation for both sexes. For girls, the Greeks used the term parthenos to indicate a precise stage of biotic development. Being a parthenos, a swift route, is not a perpetual state, but rather one which automatically looks towards a change. At the heart of the parthenos identity lies a paradox. She's attractive precisely because she's not yet a mature and married woman, yet it's also a capacity to undergo that transition which makes her desirable. What characterizes these statuettes is a young, florid body whose form shines through the clothing, prominent breast, an exuberant physicality, I don't know if the term is right, fisicità in Italian, that is an expression of the physical change we have all experienced. Youth and physical beauty, as well as, most important, the signs of female robustness, are essential elements showing the woman's capacity to give children. Physical beauty and sexual desirability are the characteristic of the Parthenoi in the various lyric fragments we have, expressed through metaphors. Images of shining and the precious metal is a conventional way of praising female beauty. The convention of depicting archaic standing female statuettes in a specific posture is fully in line with this. In fact, they are generally depicted in the act of taking a light step, with a foot in front of the other, generally the left in front of the right one. This convention, which is not just a figurative convention, finds specific correspondence in contemporary literature. A maiden who knows how to walk, walks in light step, era tombama for Sappho, only partially displaying her ankles, which have a specific erotic value. Callisfuros, writes Alcmane, with beautiful ankles, that is in contrast with Archilochus, the hateful woman with the thick ankles. The light step is also determined by the length of the chiton, which the maidens pull to the side with one hand, sometimes lifting slightly, uncovering only the ankles, but highlighting the forms beneath the fabric. In this gesture lies the maiden's grace, the charis, a quality that makes her desirable, unlike the rustic woman who doesn't know how to rise her dress above her ankles, mentioned in a fragment of Sappho, as you can see here in the slide. The manner of wearing the hair is not the same for all the statuettes of Parthenoi. Hairstyle can change from a type to another, but the common characteristic is a mass of long, unbound hair covering the shoulder. Unbounding the hair or shaking it in the koros are gestures with strong erotic charge. They indicate a premarital state. They will be cut after marriage and sometimes dedicated to the deity with other objects connected to the childhood, as in Timarette's epigram in the Antologia Palatina. In a passage from Euripides' Iphigenia among the Taurians, the protagonist mentions her luxurious hair with long tresses and the rich garments with which she participated as parthenos in wedding choruses. Indeed, clothing distinguishes the performative occasions of the parthenos, the participation in the korai, whether related to religious, civic, or wedding events, as well as the splendor and luxury of the accessories. In this sense, the particular attention paid by the craftsman Catane to the detailing of the garments, with a wide variety of solutions among the different types, and the presence of precious ornaments, recall the description of the koros in the first Parthenaic fragment by Alcmane. The sphere of female physical display also includes the so-called attributes, objects held by the Parthenoi, which, far from being offerings to the deity, are a part of a symbolic language focused on the main quality of maidens, virginity, which in Greek is precisely indicated by the term parthenia. Around this quality, which is an essential prerogative for the parthenos to become nymphe, that is, bride, turns a series of symbols that form part of a deep-rooted cultural idea, widespread throughout the Greek world, and which is regularly used to express the transition to female maturity. Indeed, they are topoi. Let's take a quick look at a few examples. Flowers are key players and at the center of a number of metaphors related to the sexual development of maidens. Whether it's a still closed bud, a blooming flower, a woven garland, or a flowery meadow in which the maidens pick flowers, the narrative is centered on virginity and its loss through marriage, often recounted in myth as a divine abduction. There are frequent references in the sources, particularly in Sappho, to the juvenile connotation of the activities of the Anthologein and Stephanoplokein, well depicted, on the other hand, on some Locrian pinakes. And you can see here the metaphor for lost virginity in Sappho as a hyacinth pounded by the shepherds. In Catania, representation of maidens bearing a still closed bud at their breast prevail, an element that immediately recalls the link between the statue of Phrasicleia and the epigram inscribed on its basis, where there is a clear reference to the age and status antigamo of the dead maiden. The symbolism of the apple also pertains to this moment of rapid transition to maturity in female life. A fragment of Sappho mentions a glykimalon, a kind of apple on high branch, so that the pickers couldn't reach it. These verses, thought by some have been referred to a maiden who had never been married, have been read by other scholars as a praise for a bride who preserved her virginity. Apples also resemble the female breast. The apple also has a specific value linked to the marriage. An apple was made for the young bride to eat, as soon as she arrived at the groom's house. Less present among the statuette's maidens is one with a bird. Ornithological references is very common in Eichmann's poetry in relation to the voice of the virgins composing the chorus, a quality useful for the Parthenoi to participate in collective performances. However, the bird is an indicator of youthfulness, as shown by many depictions on funerary stelae with maidens holding doves or birds in archaic and classical times. In a fragment, Anacreon describes the woman as a melodic and gracious Chelidon. It remains to make a few remarks on the most frequent attribute in the Catania deposit, generally held by young girls in the center of the chest, the poppy capsule. I want to add on this subject, which I addressed more extensively at the Lille conference published in 2015. It's necessary to recall briefly that the capsule in the statuettes belong to the Papaverum somniferum, which is different species from the field poppy. The capsule, represented from the Bronze Age and already known for its therapeutic qualities from very ancient times, contains alkaloid-based substances that can be used for analgesic purposes or can be lethal if given in excessive doses. It's worth noting, however, that there don't seem to be any references in archaic lyric poetry that associate the capsule with maidens. One has got back to the classical period when in the Corpus Hippocraticum, the use of such substances is put in relation to the phases of female maturation, during which it's likely that the sedative qualities of the alkaloid substances were exploited for therapeutic purposes. Nothing precludes, however, a lectio facilior, linked to the symbolism of fertility due to the presence of the seed inside, or to the symbolism of sleep, death, and fertility, connected to the concept of rebirth that is well suited to the transition from one female biotic phase to another. These brief remarks, limited to a small number of archaic lyric authors, in my opinion, emphasize the need, and also a small number of terracotta figurines, in my opinion, emphasize the need to consider, along with sculpture and figurative pottery, the immaterial datum provided by literary evidence in an attempt to reconstruct the archaic mentality. Within this mentality, or cultural ideas, the figurative terracottas in question were produced and used. What emerged is the need to consider the image as a whole, as a semantic unit in which body, dress, and attribute converged to convey a clear identity message that was recognizable in the archaic cultural sphere, regardless of context of the position. In this way, by focusing on identity as a key to interpreting the terracotta statuettes and figurines, it might be easier to explain their presence in shrines dedicated to different deities. This also entails reflecting on the terminology to be used in the description of these statuettes, which are neither offerers nor, in my opinion, dedicators, but simply representation of maidens. They, probably in collective rituals common in the archaic period, displayed themselves undesirable and chaste and formalized before the deity and the social community their probably upcoming transition from Parthenoi to Nymphae, hoping for a good marriage. Thank you.